Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing your insights into the future of leadership. But before we go into leadership, can you tell us a little bit about your own backgrounds? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I don't really think I grew up in one place. I've lived many places. Before I was 18, I lived in the United States, so only in the United States. But I was in Florida, New Jersey, Colorado, and Arizona. So I had moved around quite a bit before I was an adult. But that's where I'm originally from the U.S.
And what was your dream career when you grew up?
So I'm actually quite lucky. I'm one of those few people that knew that I wanted to be a professor of psychology when I was 15. So I made that choice. I had heard a really inspiring lecture by a social psychologist who is very famous. And I realized within an hour that that was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I'm one of those lucky people, I guess, or those fortunate people that can say 20 years later, we're doing what we wanted to do when we were children. But I also, I wanted to be a ballet dancer, but my body didn't agree with that plan. So I think being a professor was much more realistic.
Can you tell us who was a lecturer that inspired you?
Yes, his name is Robert Cialdini, and actually I'm still in touch with him. And he's an inspirational person in my life, and I would call him a mentor. I worked for him for several years as well, so before going to graduate school on my own.
So did Professor Cialdini lecture about influence?
Yes, exactly. It was a class in social psychology, but a lot of given his expertise, it was a lot about influence. So, and he's just a great human being and a scholar.
And what aspect of influence and social psychology is it that inspired you?
I don't think there was any part of social psychology necessarily, but I think just this idea that the class, when I took the class, and I was still a teenager at that point, it answered all these questions for me about fundamental human nature that I had always been curious about, but didn't know why. Like, why do we stereotype people? Why do we remember some things but not others? Why do we have certain biases in how we behave? And I thought, it just provided answers to fundamental questions about human behavior. And I also think it's quite interesting that, we've been as a human race, we've been to the moon, we've been to outer space, we've been to the depths of the ocean, but we still don't really understand what exactly happens in our own head. And what makes somebody, we truly don't know what makes somebody mentally ill versus what makes somebody incredibly smart, like an Einstein or a Stephen Hawking or whatever. So I think there's still so much to explore about the human and the human mind. And so, yeah, for me, it's like still the last frontier of exploration, the final frontier.
And tell us, Jennifer, when and how did you move into leadership?
So I moved into leadership quite gradually over my career. So when I was going to graduate school, this was between 2000 and 2005, and I was studying wisdom. So what makes someone wise, and how do they become wise? And then while I was doing my graduate training, all these ethical scandals started coming up in the U.S. news, like the WorldCom scandal and the Enron. And I started to wonder, why were these really smart, experienced people not making wise decisions? So decisions that would destroy their own careers, destroy their own families, and the companies they spent so long to build up. And so I started to wonder, how can we apply what we know about wisdom to the business domain? So I started studying business ethics after that, and that's what I did for my entire career. That's what I've done for my entire career. And it's natural that, at least it has been natural for me, to go from understanding what makes people act ethically and unethically to then start asking the questions about what does it mean to be a good leader, and how do we become good leaders, and what allows people to act consistently with their values and lead others as well. And then I've been asking more recently, how has leadership changed in the digital age? What is different about leadership, if anything? Is there in a world where data seems to be the answer to everything, is there still a role for wisdom and intuition? And if so, what is that? So my career has naturally kind of progressed to where it is today, which I guess is normal for most people.
So, Jennifer, what would you say is the role of wisdom in today's age, in the age of technology?
Yeah, that's a question, Nick, that I'm still grappling with. I think, even with all the technology out there and the data, which, people erroneously believe that data will predict the future. The only thing data does is tell us how people have acted in the past. But I think where wisdom plays an important role is kind of how we use that data, in terms of how do we use it ethically, what information is relevant and what information is not relevant, because you can also get completely bogged down in all the data. And also, when is it time for you to pass along your baton to the next person? Because I think, not only product life cycles are changing more rapidly or being shorter now than they ever have been, but I also think leadership life cycles are shorter than they ever have been, meaning that kind of like your day in the sun as a leader might be shorter than it used to be because your skills or expertise or your, technical expertise, we'll say, is not as relevant as it used to be. So you have to learn also to when to cede that power and when to give it to the next generation, and also though how to mentor that next generation. So maybe they might have better technical skills than you do, but they don't have necessarily the people leadership skills. So how do you have the confidence and the self confidence, the strong self image, to pass along that baton to the next generation, but also the leadership knowledge that they will need now to lead their people and the next generation that comes after them. But I'm not sure. I'm still trying to answer that question for myself, Nick.
And tell us, looking back at your career, was there a turning point?
A turning point. I think there were two turning points. So one is the class with Cialdini, for sure. I think I struggled before 15 to kind of figure out what I wanted to do for the rest of my life and what was going to be my talent. And then seeing him, it kind of just answered it all. And so that was certainly a turning point. And then the second one would probably be after finishing graduate school. So as I said, I studied wisdom, and the kind of the currency in academia is to publish, as you know. Sure. And it was quite difficult to get core articles, like articles in core journals on the topic of wisdom, because it's not a topic that you can get a lot of empirical data on. And, often the structure that is acceptable in top journals is not necessarily ones that are easy to publish on the topic of wisdom. So I really struggled to get publications during my career. I did a book, but most academic institutions don't value books, at least not in the area of psychology or organizational behavior. So I did a postdoctoral fellowship after my graduate school, and I had to sort of take a big pivot in my career in terms of saying, okay, maybe wisdom isn't going to be easy for me to get the career I want, meaning being a professor at a top university. So how do I take this topic and adapt it in a way that can be published in top journals? And I pretty much had to remake my career within the next 4 years. So between 2005, 2009, I had to take a major pivot in my career doing 2 postdocs. So I actually didn't do only one, I did a second one. And almost in some ways had to start from the bottom up again to rebuild an area of expertise that would be publishable in top journals so that I could have the dream job that I wanted. I don't know if I necessarily became a better scholar or thinker during those 4 years, but sometimes I think you need to adapt yourself to meet the requirements of the environment while not losing your own compass and where you want to go. And that's hard, especially in your younger years. And at times I probably did lose my compass a little bit of where I actually want to go. But then with maturity, I guess that's the benefit of getting older, is that eventually, if you still know where you're headed or where you want to go, you find it again. So I've been lucky I think I've started to find it again. So. And
Jennifer, what would you say is driving you today?
I think what drives me today is still seeing such an imbalance in the leadership ranks. I work at IMD, and 80%, I would say 80 to 90% of the people that come here are executives at some of the largest corporations in the world. And you still see, there's a certain demographic type that would take those roles. And I still see so much imbalance in the world in terms of gender, in terms of national representation, in terms of even age, in terms of racial background. And so I think what drives me today is slowly but surely helping people to become more open to diversity and become more knowledgeable about their own biases and how these biases are affecting what they perceive as leadership and who they imagine in their mind when they think of a leader. And even at IMD, I'm one of 5 women here, and there's 44 professors. So definitely in the minority. And sometimes it's difficult being in the minority. But I realize that, it's 5 now, but maybe in 5 years it will be 7 or 8, and then it will be 10, and then someday we will be equal to men. But it's going to take some time.
So it's about 10% at the moment.
Yes, about 10%, exactly, just a little more.
Okay, so Jennifer, let's talk about leadership. What does the future of what does the future of leadership mean to you?
I would say the future of leadership means 2 things. One is really rethinking our career path. And there is evidence, for example, that baby boomers really have this idea that a dream career would be to start with a company in your mid to late 20s and stay with that company for your entire career and retire there. And there's evidence that that's no longer realistic, but it's also not what, for example, millennials want. And they want much more of an adaptable kind of tipsy-turvy with lots of curves and interesting twists and turns in their career, where really they're just thinking about learning. What do I want to learn? What kind of experiences do I want to have? And also having this kind of greater purpose that guides them. And I don't think previous generations have thought about that as much. So that's one thing. I think adaptability in careers, and definitely a more diverse workforce. More diverse in terms of gender, in terms of nationality, in terms of race. And I guess learning how we can work peacefully or work most beneficially with the technology out there. And, we keep talking about AI, but I don't think most people, at least if you're not an expert, most people really know or can think about what AI would truly mean in terms of integration in the workforce. And of course, we have some of it now that we're using in terms of smart search engines and how we process data. That is all using AI. But truly understanding the full integration, which will eventually happen. Just not sure when. So I would say those are the 3 things.
Yeah. So Jennifer, when you speak to future leaders, what do you tell them they should focus? What do you tell them they should focus on for building a future-proof career, if that is possible?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. But I think, when we think about, what do you need to build to be future-proof in your career, or that you will have a happy career? Because I don't know necessarily if failing at some points in your career is necessarily a bad thing, right? So if your career isn't perfect and you have to do a restart or a pivot, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. But in terms of what skills, abilities, competencies are needed, I think one is just a constant passion for learning. And are you willing to be curious about what's out there and how things are changing, and not see it as a threat, but more see that as an opportunity to expand oneself? And so these are more, I think, qualities of a human being than necessarily skills. There's not many. I think it is important for people to start to educate themselves on what AI means, actually being able to know the technology inside and out that goes into it. I don't think that's necessary for everyone, because not everyone's going to need to do that. But certainly familiarizing yourself with how it could impact your chosen industry or what you want to do. But I think more important than that is just the curiosity for life and for learning, and realizing that the path that may veer from what you think, and being resilient to those sometimes dips that we have. So I think just resilience and curiosity and passion is more important than any certain skill or technical competency.
Right. Now, you mentioned technology. In fact, you mentioned AI. And which are the key technologies that you envisage will be driving and impacting the leadership of the future?
So I think one is another area that I focus on in my own career is lie detection, and how do you tell when someone is lying and being truthful. Right. So now, I used to think like there was no way that computers or robots were going to be able to do that as well as the trained experts. But actually there's, for example, like Google Glass that can look at people's faces and tell you what micro expressions they're showing far more accurately than many of the best experts who have been trained to see this. So I think kind of what is going to impact is any kind of software technology that's going to actually be able to tell us how people are feeling, kind of be an empathy meter, because I mean, every company out there is curious about, how do we know exactly what our customers want, and how do we know what drives our customers, and how do we meet their true needs, and what are their true needs, because sometimes people can't even identify that themselves. So any kind of technology that's going to help us understand other human beings better and how they're responding and how they're thinking and how they're feeling. I mean, right now in leadership, we ask people to self-assess themselves on different personality traits. But oftentimes, that relies on self-awareness. So at some point, I think technology will be able to, for example, look at someone's brain and tell us what personality traits that they have. So as a psychologist, I think any kind of software or technology that's going to help us to understand the individual better is going to be important. What I've also seen, not necessarily around leadership specifically, but going back to kind of this topic of big data, is that there's a lot of data out there, and companies are collecting data, but they often don't know how to use it. So any sort of software, well, not all of it is software, but software AI type applications that help to make sense of patterns in the data and what is actually important and relevant, I think is also going to be an incredibly important technology for the future. So how to use big data wisely and smartly. And many companies, at least I've been to Silicon Valley and visited some startups that are trying to do exactly this, and they're being pretty successful.
Right. And when you speak to future leaders, which social media platforms do you suggest they should use for communicating their own leadership and their personal brands?
Yeah, that's so interesting, Nick, because I don't actually. I don't think there's one platform that's most important, because I also think that maybe some things that we will recommend are going to be obsolete very quickly. So I don't recommend a single one. I think whatever you find is the best way to express yourself. If you're more of a writer, then maybe something like a blog. If you're more of a, short thinker, then Twitter. If you're someone who likes to express yourself through videos, maybe Facebook or LinkedIn. If you like to post articles that you've written, perhaps even LinkedIn, if they're more of a business, have a business focus to them rather than a personal focus. So I don't think there's one that is necessarily better than others. It really is just the platform that is most true to how you like to express yourself.
Right. Now, Jennifer, you've been mentoring many future and existing leaders. Can you maybe share a success story where you mentored somebody and that person took your advice to heart and went on to, to achieve significant success?
Okay. I'm trying to think about it. Actually, I can think about a couple leaders. One of them is he's now doing his graduate work in London, and he was a very smart undergraduate student I had, and he was struggling to try to figure out what made him passionate. And I think he was very smart, and that was really a strength, but what he was also very good at is not building his identity not having his identity attached to some kind of a career or some discipline, because I see many students say, okay, I'm good at chemistry, for example. That must be the only thing I'm good at. I better succeed at this. and therefore they're not necessarily open to other things that might be interesting to them. So I think maybe two pieces of advice I believe I gave him, and I think he would agree with this, is one, be open. I think it's much harder to explore as you get older and as you start to pigeonhole yourself, but also invest in certain things that, spend years of your life and money. So when you're young, I think not pigeonholing yourself too early and being open to trying other things, which, by the way, I didn't do. As I said, as a teenager, I wanted to be a social psychologist, and I went that route. And I wonder if I had been more open to trying other things and less kind of attached to this one idea, could it have maybe led me to a different path where I would have been more successful? I'm not sure. But that was the first thing. I think he was very open to saying, I'm not one thing or I'm not another. I'm just going to explore. And the second thing I believe that I advised him, or I tried to do with him, is not, in anyone I mentor, and this is not only him, but really anyone, not trying to make them another version of you. So I see that oftentimes with leaders, is that because they think, because I guess we're egocentric as leaders, we think about ourselves, that we try to mentor other people to be copies of us, rather than truly to look at what they are good at and what their strengths are and what makes them passionate, and to help them down that road rather than the road that you have in mind for them. And so I think as a mentor, I try to listen to him as much and to hear what is he curious about and what makes him passionate. And he seems to be doing very well. He's studying international politics in London right now. So, yeah. So and it's very different, obviously, from my own career.
Okay. And Jennifer, are there any role models of leadership that you would recommend future leaders should study?
Yeah. So one person I would strongly recommend, and I admire her very much, is Angela Arendt. She was the former CEO of Burberry, and now she's the head of retail at Apple. And there's a few reasons why I admire her. Is I think she's someone who's not afraid to fail or jump out of their comfort zone, or to even look foolish or stupid because they don't know something. So I mean, she is responsible, or she and her team are responsible for putting together a true digital transformation at one of the most traditional fashion houses in the world. So, I mean, Burberry was known for making trench coats for soldiers, and she really made it a brand that was relevant to millennials, which is quite remarkable. And she has no technological background. She has no background in digital. She comes from the fashion industry. And I think she was just willing to say, okay, what do I know? What do I not know? If I don't know it, how can I build a network around me that can supplement these skills? And so I think that's a real great lesson for leaders to look at. You're not going to know everything, especially if you're an older leader, quote unquote older. You might not have the technical skills. So are you willing to look to admit what you don't know, and then look for other people out there to supplement those skills? And also, she talks a lot about her values, and her values of family and faith, and using those, no matter how much she's gotten into digital or working in a digital environment, how much she's fundamental core values are essential for guiding leaders' lives. And I couldn't agree more. So I would say for those two reasons, she is someone to look up. And I mean, I think it's a danger to model yourself after anyone, because we're all unique and we're all different. Right. But certainly we can take lessons from other people. Yeah.
And you say the name is Angela Hayes?
Angela Arendt, Ahrendts.
Yeah. Okay. And you say she's currently at Apple or Burberry?
She's currently at Apple. Currently at Apple. She left Burberry in 2014, I believe.
Right. Now, Jennifer, how can our listeners connect with you, and where can they follow you?
On LinkedIn. So I often post articles on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to follow me. But also, anytime someone has a question, feel free to send me an email. I'm a professor at IMD, a business school in Lausanne, and you can find me on our website. And I love hearing from future leaders, because obviously that our society and our planet will not exist without you all. So I like hearing from them, and if I can be of any help, I will be happy to try to help.
Great. And last but not least, is there one piece of advice that you would like to convey to future leaders that they should implement in their own, let's say, in their personal leadership?
I guess 2 or 3 things I would recommend on personal leadership, which certainly, I don't believe in the difference between personal and professional. I think we either, developing ourselves as leaders professionally, we have to also develop ourselves personally as leaders, because anything in our personal life will carry over to our professional life. But I would say, don't underestimate the roles of passion. Just loving something, because if you're passionate about something, you will work the extra hours to do it, and you will be genuinely curious about it, whether or not you're making money or being successful at that time.
Right.
So I think, find what you're passionate about, and try a lot of different things if you don't know what it is right now, because you will find something. 2, don't underestimate hard work. I think, sometimes all of us, and maybe, every leader I've ever seen has gone through a dip in their career or a dip in their life where they think, oh, it's not going to get any better and I should give up. But there's a lot to say for hard work. And sometimes it's just resilience and getting through the tough times that really makes you a successful leader eventually. And then thirdly is self-love. I think it's sometimes much easier to love others or forgive others than forgive the self and love the self. And I think to truly be a successful leader of the self and of others, you have to love who you are. And even if maybe you don't think other people love who you are at that time, find what you appreciate about yourself and really honor that, and be grateful for that. And as I said, it's important to have role models and to have people to look up to, but we're all different and we can't be like one another. I think that's what makes people beautiful.
Well,
so those are my piece of advice.
Thank you so much for sharing your leadership journey and your leadership insights. In fact, it was your insights that I found on LinkedIn, and I found them very valuable. And thank you for being an inspiration, and also for sharing with us that what ignited your leadership journey was that lecture by Professor Cialdini, and your passion for social psychology, which I believe is so important for leadership. So
absolutely.
Thank you for your inspiration. Thank you for helping us build a better future. And I would like to wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, Nick. And thank you for being curious in my views. I appreciate it and this opportunity to talk with you.